Rachel Reeves, Michael Gove has said this morning that he'll update the list of organisations that the government treats as extremist. In fact, it was Labour back in 2009 that shut the door on some of these organisations. Do you think it's the right thing to do at this time?
Well, we haven't seen the list yet or the new definition of extremism that Michael Gove is talking about in the newspapers today. So we'll wait to see what he produces. But I do think it is right that we look again at the definition. But the most important thing from my perspective is that more is done to bring communities together. The vast majority of people in this country respect, tolerate difference, welcome difference and diversity. It's one of the things that make our country great. But of course, it is always right to tackle extremism and hatred wherever it rears its head.
Let's talk about the budget that we've just seen. Knowing what you do now, is it still your intention to stick to the spending plans laid out by the government?
Well, there are areas where we would do more. And I have already announced a small number of targeted tax increases to provide an immediate injection of cash into public services. So it's why I've said, for example, that private schools should pay VAT and business rates, and that money should go into the 93% of our children at state schools. It's why I've said that we would close the loopholes whereby some of the biggest oil and gas companies are not paying a proper amount of tax based on the windfall profits they're making. We would close those loopholes and we would use that money to fund investment in some of the industries of the future, from carbon capture and storage to gigafactories for electric vehicles to floating offshore wind. So there's a number of areas where we would go further than the government and provide that immediate injection of cash into public services.
But overall, you plan to stick to the same fiscal rules to essentially cap borrowing and so on. You're not planning to...
I mean, we have fiscal rules which I will enforce with an iron discipline. They're slightly different to the government's fiscal rules in that they separate out investment on day-to-day spending and on things that we need to build and boost our long-term productivity and growth. But yes, we've said that we would get debt falling as a share of GDP, we would balance day-to-day spending with tax receipts, and then subject to that, we would invest in those things to boost our growth and productivity, because that, Trevor, is absolutely key and has been the missing ingredient in the government's economic approach the last 14 years. If our economic growth had been at the same rate of similar countries, OECD developed economies, over the last 14 years, our economy would be £140 billion bigger. That's worth £5,000 for every family in Britain, and would mean we could have brought in £50 billion of additional tax receipts without raising a penny of tax. So we've got to get our economy growing again, and that's...
All right. So, forgive me, just so you've established that you're basically working in the same envelope.
Well, it's not exactly the same envelope, Trevor, for the reasons that I've given, the windfall tax, the different VAT and business rates for private schools, for example.
Can I come to that? Can I come to that? Are you feeling a bit sore that the Chancellor has shot at least two of your foxes, the windfall tax being one, the other one being the abolition of non-dom status? We can talk about timetabling and so on, but essentially, he's taken that from you, hasn't he?
Well, look, the non-doms is an utter humiliation for this government. The last budget of this Parliament, they've had 14 years, and they used this moment to close a non-dom tax loophole that everyone has been aware of for years. If they had have done this when we first announced it, we could have brought in billions of pounds extra to either keep taxes down for working people or indeed inject money into our public services. So frankly, Trevor, what has taken them so long?
Isn't that a little bit ungenerous? Isn't that a little bit ungenerous? Both you and your colleagues have been saying for, well, a couple of years now, this is what the government should do, and you urge them to do it. In fact, I can play you a clip of your colleague Wes Streeting urging the government to do exactly what they've done.
And he is welcome to nick Labour's plan to abolish the non-dom tax status and train 7,500 more doctors every year. A plan so good, Mr Speaker, the Chancellor himself admitted the Conservative government should nick it.
Why aren't you saying this morning, jolly good, well done, Jeremy?
Because I could have done it years ago, and we could have reduced those NHS hospital waiting lists as Wes set out. More than 7 million are on hospital waiting lists. Imagine what good could have been done if the Chancellor and Prime Minister had have done this years ago. So it is a humiliation that they're doing it at this late stage. They've run out of ideas. They're quickly running out of road. Let me just also say on the windfall tax, Trevor, because you asked me about that as well. There are two problems that the government had with the windfall tax. The first was that it didn't extend to the end of the next Parliament. They've done that. That will raise about £1 billion, just a little bit more. But there's also loads of loopholes in their energy profits levy, which means that many companies aren't even paying any of the energy profits levy at all, or if they are, very small amounts. So we would close those loopholes, and that would bring in over £7 billion during the course of the next Parliament. So we would use that money to invest in the jobs and the industries of the future. And I've made an announcement today, Trevor, that you would have seen on the front page of the Sunday Times on that.
I want to come to that announcement in just a second, but just one last point on this issue. You said that you think that they haven't got it exactly right and so on, but broadly speaking, they have done what you said should be done. They've allocated the funds elsewhere, tax cuts. Where are you going to find the money now to fulfil your promises? Breakfast clubs, childcare, and so on and so forth?
Well, we said that we would have used the non-DOMS money to create 2 million additional appointments every year in the National Health Service to reduce waiting lists.
So where's that money coming from
Let me
now?
just tell you what the commitments were. 700,000 emergency dental appointments and free breakfast clubs at all primary schools. The government, of course, on Wednesday have used that money elsewhere. And so I will now, with my team, go through the documents published this week in an orderly way and identify those funding streams. Those pledges very much stand. They are national priorities and they are Labour's priorities as well. And we will now make sure we identify the funding streams, because everything in our manifesto will be fully costed. And
you reckon you can do that without borrowing?
There will not be additional borrowing for day-to-day spending in Labour's manifesto. I've been very clear about the fiscal rules to get debt falling as a share of GDP, to pay for day-to-day expenditure through tax receipts, and there won't be anything in our manifesto that breaks those rules. But I think it is right, and your viewers would expect me to go through the documents methodically and make sure we identify that funding.
OK. As you said, this morning you've announced something which you're calling the National Wealth Fund, and you want to put £7.3 billion of public money and raise 3 times as much from private sources to provide net zero jobs, support green schemes and so on. Funnily enough, when you do the maths, that adds up to around £28 billion. Isn't this just your old green prosperity scheme warmed up, but this time using somebody else's money?
Well, when the government crushed the economy and sent mortgage rates soaring, it will impact what a future Labour government will be able to do. And so we've had to adapt our plans accordingly, reflecting the fact that when we first announced our Green Prosperity Plan, interest rates were 0.1%. They're now 5.25%. The government is spending something like £70 billion more on an annual basis, paying interest on government debt. And so it does affect what an incoming Labour government would be able to do.
So it is basically the same plan, except you haven't got the money for it.
So we now need to do everything we can to leverage in private sector investment. And the great thing is that businesses, investors are saying that there is money ready to flow into some of these industries, whether it's gigafactories, green hydrogen, renewable-ready ports, etc. But we need a government that backs those ambitions and has the same ambition that other countries around the world have. And this is about creating good jobs, hundreds of thousands of them, paying a decent wage in former industrialised communities and coastal communities. It's about bringing down people's energy bills, and it's also about boosting our country's economic and national security by producing homegrown energy here in Britain.
Forgive me for interrupting you, but we get that, and in fact you've explained what the plan is before, but it is essentially the same plan. Let me ask you about another bit of public spending. Chancellor put aside £3.5 billion for technology to improve NHS efficiency. Can the NHS now start to spend that money in full confidence that even if there is a change of government and you are Chancellor, it will not be clawed back?
Absolutely. And Wes Streeting, our Shadow Health Secretary, has already spoken about the need to improve productivity, to use technology better in our National Health Service. And that's true in other public services as well, whether it is schools or work and pensions.
That's clear enough. Another aspect of the Chancellor's plans, which is set out in the OBR's document, is migration. This all only adds up if there is migration of around 350,000 a year, according to the OBR, and the Chancellor pretty much confirmed that. Are you happy? Will a Labour government be happy with a long-run net migration number of around 350,000?
I think the really revealing thing, Trevor, in the OBR, Office for Budget Responsibility documents last week is that the only reason that our economy grows this year in their forecasts is because of immigration. GDP per head of the population is actually falling this year and has been revised down in all but 1 year of this Parliament. The only growth plan this government has left is high levels of immigration, and I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with that at all, because it's not lifting the living standards of people who are already living in the UK. And that's why we need to invest in skills by reforming the apprenticeship levy. It's why we need to get more people back to work, and the Office of Budget Responsibility documents this week showed that 600,000 additional people are going to be out of the labour market by the end of the forecast period, costing an additional £33 billion. Well, I'm not going to...
What level of immigration would Labour be content with? What's your top level?
I'm not going to pluck numbers out of the air. That's what the government have been doing for the last 14 years. But I want to skill up people who are living in the UK.
200,000?
I've just said I'm not going to pluck numbers out of the air. But what I want to do, Trevor, is
surely
skill up
you must
the
have
people.
thought about this.
Look, this government have been plucking numbers out of the air for the last 14 years, and that hasn't worked. It hasn't been successful because there's been no plan for skilling up people and getting people back to work who are already in the UK. And that would be my priority. Liz Kendall, our Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, has set out in some detail how we're going to reform the NHS so that we can do more of the operations and procedures to get more people back to work, mental health hubs in our communities and in our schools, and ensuring that the vast numbers of people who are out of work, not in the labour market today, are helped back into jobs. That's the way to get our economy growing and to lift living standards, and so that we're less reliant on immigration.
Let's deal with something that maybe you can tell me something about.
Well, I think I told you quite a lot, Trevor, then about how we're going to get people back to work and fill those vacancies in the jobs market.
You've been telling me why you wouldn't be doing what the Conservatives are doing. You haven't really told me what you would do.
Well, we're going to get people back to work by skilling them up, by reducing those NHS waiting lists, and by addressing the big challenges we have with mental health. That is our approach to filling the gaps in the labour market in Britain.
I won't trade blows with you about that. Let me ask you about something else that I think is very important to most viewers and most people. Europe's largest local authority, Birmingham, essentially has gone bust. It's surviving because government's allowing it to raise council tax by over 20%. There are another 6, 7, 8, possibly more local authorities who say they're on the verge of bankruptcy. And we know that what Mr Hunt's plans are going to do will be lead to funding cuts for local councils. Now, if you come into government, you could give them the cash to dig them out. You could allow them to raise council taxes, or you could simply say, sink or swim. What in principle, what are you going to say, particularly to those Labour councillors, about their future? They need some answers, direction now.
Yeah, look, I understand the huge challenges that local authorities are facing after the cuts that have been experienced these last 14 years. In the government's current plans, expenditure on public services increases by 1% in real terms over the course of the next Parliament. So overall, there aren't cuts to public spending, but I'm under no illusions about the scale of the challenge that I will inherit if I become Chancellor later this year. And I need to be honest with people.
We know some departments are protected, local councils are not. So what are you going to say to the local councils? Are you going... a lot of Labour councils hope that Labour will win and you'll be the cavalry coming over the hill.
But I need to be honest, Trevor. I'm not going to be able to fix all the problems straight away. The government have caused huge damage both to our public finances and also to our public services. There is a plan to inject money through the targeted tax increases that I've already spoken about. But in the end, we have got to grow our economy, because it is only through growing our economy that we're going to have the money both to improve living standards and have money for our public services. And that's why my focus is on reforming the planning system to get Britain building again, reforming the apprenticeship levy to help businesses get the skills that they need, our National Wealth Fund to leverage in private sector investment to grow the economy. If we do those things, we will bring in the tax revenue and we will be able to invest in public services again. There's no shortcut. That is the way to do it.
That is admirably clear. You are saying to local councils, don't imagine that when Labour turns up, it's all going to get fixed. You are going to face the toughest time of your life, because we're not just going to drop money on you to solve the problems that have arisen.
I've been really clear, Trevor, that everything on manifesto will be fully costed and fully funded. But the Office of Budget Responsibilities forecast is based on the government's plans for growth and for our economy. Labour's plans are different plans. Businesses say that if we reform the planning system, we can build more homes and we can boost our energy infrastructure investment with private sector money. That will bring in tax revenues that will mean we can start investing in our public services. So things will look and feel different under a Labour government, but only if we can grow the economy in the way that I've set out. That is the way to improve our public services.
Rachel Reeves, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.